Let me begin by asking you to close your eyes. We've all come into the room with some customary human baggage. Thoughts about families, thoughts about our departure, perhaps later today, perhaps thoughts about our business, schedule. And in a moment, I'm going to count to 3. And at the count of 3, very quickly, I want you to go to the back of the room, not physically, but however you feel comfortable considering it, using your imagination or going in spirit. But go to the back of the room, and when you get there, there will be a locker that will be your locker, a place to put your concerns, your family issues, whatever the normal baggage is that we bring into the room, and just place them there. They'll be there when you leave so you can reclaim them. So you won't lose them unless you choose to lose them. So at the count of 3, quickly go to the back of the room, return. I'll count backwards from 3 to 1, and we'll all be together with perhaps a little less baggage. So counting to 3, 1, perhaps you've got all your issues and concerns in little boxes, or maybe while I've been speaking, you put them in little suitcases or carpet bags. 2, you're ready to go to the back of the room just to place them in your locker and return to your seat. 3, and you go to the back of the room and place there whatever you're comfortable placing. Then return to your seat. 3, you're back in your seat. 2 and 1, open your eyes. And thank you very much for coming this morning. I'll tell you a little bit about how the book was formed. There's too much content in the book to share it all within the brief amount of time we have this morning. But I will share some of the content of the book. Then I will hopefully leave some time for questions and would like to channel Jesus for you so that Jesus can answer your questions. Author's disclaimer at this moment, I don't assume to have a Jesus as a captive audience, like he's a one-trick pony, and every time I want Jesus to appear, he appears. So there's a little bit of risk on my part, none on your part, that if for some reason Jesus says something like, gee, it's Sunday, you should know I'm busy doing other things, or whatever. And if Jesus decides not to appear, then you're stuck with me to answer your questions, and we'll carry on. So how did this all begin? In 1986, I was meditating, and an entity appeared to me that I'd never seen before. Now, I'm accustomed to having entities appear in my meditations periodically, as you may be. They're not there all the time. They don't come and do grand and glorious things. It's just sort of like I'm in a room by myself meditating, and out of curiosity, they open the door and maybe step in and, my words, hang out for a while. And then they leave. And that doesn't happen all the time. I don't keep track of how often it does happen because that's not important to me, but periodically it happens. I'm also accustomed to entities because over the years I have 4 or 5 that are sort of regulars. And I call them my guys. Guys is not a male or female designation. It's just a generic term that sort of slang that I use to discuss my guys. Usually my guys come just to participate in the meditation. There's no interaction between us. They do their thing, I do my thing. Occasionally when I do psychic readings, they appear and render their opinion. So they get involved with me and give me information that they think I should share with the person for whom I'm providing a reading. So when this entity appeared, it was not unusual. And this entity I'm describing, from my point of view, did the same thing other entities have done. It appeared, it left. Sometime later, not the next day, but sometime later in a meditation, it appeared. That kept happening until finally I asked the entity if it would describe itself, just so I could have some designation to give it, so that when it did show up, I could say, hi Fred, or hi George, or hi Helen, or whatever designation it gave me. And the entity agreed and said, in my last incarnation, I was Jesus of Nazareth. And my first response, emotionally and mentally, was something that would probably sound like, yeah, right. Because I just assumed Jesus would have a few more things to do rather than drop by my meditation. So it must have been a slow day somewhere, and Jesus was walking around looking for something to do and said, I think I'll pop in on this guy. That was pretty much it. Periodically, Jesus continued to appear until finally we had a type of conversation. I'm sure this happens for all of us in very different ways, but Jesus and I had a conversation, and Jesus said, I would like your commitment to write a book and get it published. I might pause to parenthetically add that he did not say, and stand up and speak in public about it. So I guess this is kind of on me. But I thought about it for quite a while. In another communication, Jesus said, I want you to write this book, and a person named Bobby, a guy named Bobby, will help you write the book. Now, this was in 1986. No computers, no cell phones. We were still using home phones. We were running ads in the paper, that sort of thing. So I thought, Jesus wants me to write a book, and who is this Bobby person? And what do I do? Do I run an ad in the paper that says, if you're the Bobby that's supposed to work with me in Jesus, would you call BR549 or whatever my phone number was? So I kind of tabled the issue. No pressure from Jesus. Eventually I said to Jesus, okay, a commitment to write a book, submit it to publishers. I'll do that. But I'm going to need some help with this Bobby person because I don't know anybody named Bobby. About 2 weeks later, I was at a social function, met a person that I had known and met before just casually, whose name was Bobby. So now I'm starting to get nervous because I'm thinking, okay, maybe this is the Bobby. How do you talk about this? Do you just go up to someone you think is almost a total stranger and say, hey, by any chance, has Jesus mentioned to you that we're supposed to do this thing together? Is that okay with you? What do you think? So, it's like a guy who sees, pardon me for going extremely heterosexual here, but it's kind of like a guy who's single, who sees a lady and he wants to know if she's single or not. And if you're kind of shy like me, how do there's all this stuff you got to go through to try to kind of casually be around her to say something. Well, eventually I worked up my nerve and just thought, I've just got to blurt it out. So in a private moment, I said to Bobby, I know this is going to sound crazy, but I meditate. And in one of my meditations, Jesus asked me to write a book. And he said, you would help me. And then it's like, hopefully he doesn't hit me. Hopefully he doesn't laugh and say to the whole group, hey, we have a live one here. Guess what this guy just said? Turns out Bobby read extensively in the field of metaphysics, something I have never done. I tend to be more of an experiential person. Oh, you can go places in your mind and talk to people and talk to entities and travel to the past and travel to the future. Okay, I'll dive into the deep end of that. But the book part I had never done. So Bobby was very open to the proposal. The end result was that that Jesus gave us a list of subjects that he wanted to discuss. That's the chapters in the book. I don't have a word for what I do. So I like to say, I go away. I went away, and Jesus channeled the initial material for all the subjects through me. Excuse me, I'm not supposed to do that. Bobby managed the tape recorder. Again, pre-computer days, so we were taping using little cassettes. The channeling sessions usually lasted 3 to 4 hours. I was younger then, so I could go longer without having to go to the bathroom. That'll mean something to people with white hair. After we addressed the subjects, I would take the tapes to a stenographer who would transcribe the material. I would sit down and read the material, listening to the tapes to make sure the words were correct and that sort of thing. Bobby and I would read the materials and come up with questions. Then we'd have another channeling session. So over about 9 months, the book was formed in that fashion. Usually we had at least 1 4-hour session a week, sometimes 2, on occasions 3. I put a table of contents together, submitted the book to 20 publishers, probably heard from 2 or 3. They're busy, the others I didn't hear from. The end result, it wasn't published. I boxed it up into boxes and put it in my garage and went on about my career. 21 years later, I retired. I pulled the boxes out of the garage, re-edited, resubmitted to more publishers. And you probably don't need to be psychic if you're in this audience to guess which publisher decided to publish the book. So that's roughly how the book came into being. Again, there's too much material in the book to cover, so I'm going to cover just a couple of the high points, hopefully to leave some time for questions. So one of the questions Jesus asked to all of us is, who are you? And that's not the typical question, or the answer is not the typical answer like, well, I'm a carpenter, or I'm a bus driver, or I'm a doctor, or I'm a lawyer, or my name is, or I'm married to so-and-so, or I'm the person that walks in the park with the big lab named Herb, or whatever. Jesus said the answer is, you are God, part of God. You've heard that. As I sat where you're sitting this week, I thought, these other speakers somehow had to access the content of my slide presentation and capture some of my points. What am I going to have to say? Because they've already said it. However, there is a difference between intellectually understanding that you are divine and actually feeling it and experiencing it. I'm in the front of the line, so don't be lonely, struggling with how do you feel and experience that you're God. Let me tell you a story. When I was about 9 or 10, living in a state you may be familiar with, the state of Arkansas, my dad and I were driving around a dusty country road, And in the distance, we saw a farmer with his pickup truck parked under a tree. And the pickup truck was filled with crates of peaches. So when we got close to the truck, my father pulled the car over next to the farmer's pickup truck. We got out of the car. My dad and the farmer exchanged greetings, and the farmer looked at me and said, "Son, would you like to taste a peach?" And I looked at my father, who nodded his permission. I responded, "Yes, sir." He took an old pocket knife out of his pocket, cut a wedge out of the peach, and handed it to me. I put the peach in my mouth with the skin, the outside of the peach, on my tongue, and the flesh of the peach, if you will, towards the roof of my mouth, and I pressed the peach up into the roof of my mouth. And the peach just exploded, as did my head, with the sweet, juicy flavor of a peach. There's a distinct difference in knowing about a peach and having felt a peach and its flavor and its juice and its taste in your mouth. So it is with this struggle of getting in touch with our Godhood and feeling it and experiencing it like the peach. You're also a creator. I must refer to my notes. We had some technical challenge, so you'll have to put up with me looking at notes periodically. As a creator, you are a living, breathing, creating machine. Most of us aren't aware of that. We kind of do it unconsciously. If we had a creator button or a creator dial and it went from 1 to 10, the dial is on automatically, but we've probably never touched it, or we haven't touched it much, and we don't know how it works that much. And most of us are in that boat. We are also an energy system. Our true nature is that we are an energy system inhabiting a human body. That has a lot of implications. The one I want to choose to emphasize this morning is your connectedness to God or to the source. In the challenge, Jesus prefers the two words, the source, although God was also used frequently. You are always connected to the source. You can't do anything to unplug that connection. You cannot be not connected. There's nothing you can do or think to disconnect from the source. You sort of come hardwired with that connection into this existence. You don't have to believe it. You don't even have to feel it. But you still are that creator, that energy system. So, if you accept your divinity, if you just intellectually embrace that thought, then what could your purpose be? You're a creator. Your purpose is to create. That's one of the reasons you are here. You've been creating since you first separated from the source, and you continue to create. Unfortunately, it doesn't take our awareness. It would be fortunate if we could somehow do something to be aware of it. But whether you're aware of it or not, you are creating. Purpose is also experience. This is a challenge for me because I tend to sort of be a shy, monkish person. I'm much more comfortable by myself or with 3 or 4 people. The larger the group, the higher the probability I want to go find a nice place in the corner and get out of the way. So it's easy for me, therefore, to really like this meditation stuff and traveling to other dimensions and doing psychic readings for people and going into the past and going to the future and all that kind of stuff. That's just, it seems to be easy. However, we're all here to experience. That's one of the reasons we came. So for me, and maybe for some of you, there's a need to balance perhaps this desire to escape this dimension or not be here any more than you have to be, and this need to be here because you decided to be here. We all are here because we decided to be here. So we should experience, that's our purpose. Then our purpose is also to return to the source. This is a choice we all make. It's returning to the source is not something you earn. There aren't steps and levels of achievement that finally, once you get to the head of the class or whatever, you get to return to the source. It's a decision that you make whenever you make it. Now, obviously, excuse me, returning to the source is admittedly a rather esoteric discussion. It's something like this. Let's pretend that I had on the stage a large beaker of water. And in my hand, I had an eyedropper filled with water. And that I held the eyedropper above the beaker, squeezed one drop off, and that drop begins to descend towards the beaker of water. Water moving towards water. And eventually, that drop loses itself and disappears in the water and becomes water. That's sort of what losing yourself in the source is like, but it's our decision. We just, at some point, decide, I want to return to the source. So, if you're a God, and you accept that, how do you do that? How do you be God? One thing you need to do is to know yourself. You're here in this physical dimension because you decided to be here. You selected the family, the body, the whole 9 yards. This morning I was struggling with that some because there is a physical malady. If you heard Victoria speak yesterday, it's a headache compared to what Victoria's been through. But it's called benign essential tremor. Your hand's tremor. Sometimes your head's tremor. Sometimes your other limbs. Unfortunately, it does not translate into good dancing. My wife is an exceptional dancer. I can't dance for anything. So I've got tremors and I can't even dance very well. But it's a little bit like Parkinson's, but not as bad as Parkinson's. Usually, when you're as old as I am, you've got it, it's as bad as it's going to be. And the worst thing about it is occasionally you poke yourself in the eye with a fork or a spoon, or, you spill hot coffee in your lap or something like that. But otherwise, it's no big deal. And this morning I was thinking, how am I going to do the slide presentation, manage papers, because my hand's shaking, all this kind of stuff. And I was looking through the presentation thinking, oops, I chose this lot. I came here. So I might as well get used to it and live with it. And that's part of what we all have to do. That's part of knowing yourself. Knowing yourself involves assessment. John is here vigorously writing. I believe I can see him in the bright lights. Thank you, John. In some terms, it's a good, healthy psychological process. Who are you? So it's assessing who you are, what your experiences have been, accepting that, embracing it, forgiving yourself. I'm sure I'm not the only person in the room who has done something that they're kind of glad nobody else knows about or very few people know about. And since we're human, there's some likelihood that will happen again. And part of being God in a physical plane is embracing who you are and forgiving yourself where necessary and changing where appropriate. Seeing what I left out in all of that. Let's just move on. Part of being God is to experience. We've talked about that a little bit. You're here to not spend a lot of your time floating around in other dimensions or running from, in some physical way, who you are. You're here to experience existence. This is look at the flower, feel the puppy, feel the wind against your face kind of stuff. Have moments where you experience human existence that you created. Part of being God is to be still. We did a little bit of that stillness in the beginning. But part of that stillness is an internal stillness as well as an external stillness. For instance, to sit or stand, whatever suits your fancy, and focus on your breath. Not out of your mouth, have your mouth closed, but focus on your breath and focus particularly on where does the air come out of my body around my nose? Do I feel that? Does it feel like it's kind of close to the outside of the nose? Does it feel like it's deeper into the nasal passage? Kind of just breathe in and out, not fast, just normally. And notice where that breath is. Be still and notice that. And then soon, oh my gosh, I'm thinking about this or that or something else. What was this about breath? I'm off somewhere else in my mind. So when you notice that you're not noticing, just notice it and refocus. You're noticing on what you intended to notice on to begin with. And practice that. That's part of internal and external stillness. It's one of the ways you express your divinity. I'm thinking in my mind, according to Jesus. Just for the sake of conversation, I'm on the record as saying, I never say that like it's a trump card. You know, so you talk to Ferdinand and you talk to Melchizedek, but I talk to Jesus, and Jesus said this, so this must be right. I don't have a good answer for, you know, here we all go off and get information and all that kind of stuff. Not my job to make heads or tails of that process. I just like doing it. And I can report on my doing, and you report on your doing, and we all embrace each other's doing, and we do what's comfortable. Finally, you be God by giving and taking. Good old earthly, your neighbor needs to ride to the airport, so you give your neighbor a ride to the airport. Your friend is going through something and you know that they don't have time to cook a meal for the family, so you cook a meal for the family, communicate that with them, you take it over. Just good old-natured human giving and receiving is an expression of your divinity. Time to turn the page. I'm curious if any of you, in all this process of being human, want God's forgiveness. It is a very ancient, very important religious theme to receive God's forgiveness. So your struggle for forgiveness is with God, not God. And it's important for you to see how I wrote that, because usually in English, when we use the word God, God gets a capital G and an uppercase G. Remember that connectedness to the source, to God, that I talked about, that you can't change, that is always there, it's kind of like you're irrefutably, inseparably, you cannot be separated or do anything to separate yourself from the source. However, we often still feel this need for God's forgiveness. But the secret is, it's not necessary. You have a direct connection with the source. You can't be connected. There's no need for forgiveness. Your struggle is with yourself. We're not on my slide. Can you see those slides? Have you seen any of the slides? I've really enjoyed the slides if you haven't seen them. Thank you, Jonathan. So your struggle is with the person that's the lowercase g, not with God. Whether you believe it or not, whether you feel it or not, whether you're aware of it or not, you're okay with God. You're not okay with yourself. I'm not going to push a button, but let's go back to assessment, acceptance, forgiveness of yourself. That's your divine issue with your divine self. I want to do a brief exercise, and I've taken up more time than I thought I would, but you can do this in a heartbeat. So, fast pace. Here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask you to stand up if you can. If you can't stand up, don't worry about it. Turn around. So the first row turns around and faces the second row. The third row turns around and faces the fourth row. You'll figure it out. Turn around quickly. Find someone's hand to shake. Hang on. And I want you to say two things to that person. I am your first name. And then I am God. Thank you. Social hour is over. The speakers behind. You don't have to answer, but for a second or two, reflect on, did you feel awkward at all? Was it easier to say, in my case, I'm Henry, and a little more awkward or felt a little different when you said, I am God? And I wanted to do that exercise just for you to have a chance to sort of get in touch with, how on earth are we going to feel our identity, our divinity, to move beyond an intellectual understanding into feeling and experiencing what we talk about often. Moving on. So you're this grand divine being. You cannot be separated from the source. There are no forgiveness issues between you and the source, your true nature, as an energy system. If that's the case, let's move from ourselves and look at the person that I claim is the author of what I wrote, and that is Jesus. And we ask the question, why did Jesus incarnate? Why did Jesus come and live this entity, the Jesus life? One reason Jesus said was just for his own development. He's an energy system, a spirit coursing through existence, creating, experiencing, returning to the source eventually, just like us. So, in essence, that entity has the same kind of issues, if you will, that we have, and Jesus selected that incarnation for his own development and maturity. So part of the reason he came was to serve. And I submit, it's impossible for us to put ourselves into the mindset and lifestyle of a first century Jewish man in Roman-occupied Judea, where 99% of the population have absolutely no rights whatsoever. Probably 99.5% of the population cannot read or write, where there are no 401k plans, there are no salaries. Life is something we can't imagine, and that's a day-to-day life. At the end of the day, I found some food to eat. I survived getting in trouble and getting killed. I'm going to sleep and start all over the next morning. Jesus came to serve in that kind of arena, and in doing so, managed to break a few rules, like he talked to females in public places. He interacted with the wrong officials according to what his race and what his position in society told him or described that he should do. Jesus came to teach, so by doing these things, he was, in a way that we can't imagine, living life very differently, drastically differently from a lot of his peers. And if you're conquered by the Roman Empire, and you're Jewish, and you're a peasant, you don't teach, you have nothing to teach. You're not worth teaching anything. So Jesus dared to move beyond a lot of these fixed societal limits, to assume that he had a message that people would want to be interested in. And of course, he gave it to the wrong people. He gave it to the disenfranchised, to the slaves, to the poor, not to the privileged few, to people in positions of authority. Jesus also expressed his divinity. He healed people using the same energy that we all have. I don't know about you, but I haven't figured out much about that energy, much less how to reach out and touch someone and they're healed, or have some kind of, I'm sorry, I'm a product of my generation, Vulcan mind meld or something like that, where he touches someone and suddenly they're healed. He expressed his divinity also by what he said and how he said it. If we heard it, we would think maybe it's plain common sense. When he said it to his audience, it was daring, challenging, life-threatening. And all of these reasons, that's why Jesus came into existence. Was Jesus special? Particularly, was he more special than any of us? Don't we? I mean, I don't know about you, but I was raised to revere Jesus. Jesus was so distant and remote that he was untouchable. He was part of the Trinity, part of the Godhead. But was Jesus special? And Jesus said, no, he wasn't. Especially from the perspective of, is Jesus more special to the source, to God, than any of us? And Jesus' answer was, of course not. No way. Jesus was just ready when he incarnated into that existence. And I know all of you are going to rush out and buy the book, but I'll give you this hint about the book. Jesus used an illustration about baseball. He said there were 5 baseball players in the minor leagues. They were all great baseball players. Any coaches, any players that were already in the major leagues and really good players knew these 5 players were going to eventually make it to the big leagues and be really good baseball players. And they all had kind of different skill sets and were developing in their own way. But one day, one of them was approached by a major league team and said, we want you to come up into the majors. Jesus asked, does that make that single player better than the other 4 in the illustration? And of course, the answer is obvious. No, that player is not more special. That player was just ready at that time. All the other players have separate skill sets. They're all going to be great. But Jesus was just ready. He said it was sort of like that. That's why he came into existence. But he also said he was different. I was born with the ability to sing. I will not sing for you now because I haven't sung in a while, and vocal cords are muscles, and if you don't use them, you lose them. And I pretty much lost mine. But as a child, 5 or 6 years old, my father would put me behind the pulpit on 2 wooden Coke cases. And with my mother on one side and my father on the other, Daddy would say, now we're going to sing a hymn. You just make some sound that's not like your mother's or mine, that sounds good with the other sounds. That grew to where in college you could place me into a choral group that's going to sing 8-part Bach cantatas. And I could hear my part separate from the other 7. Unfortunately, if you gave me the sheet music and said, we're not going to give you other sounds, make the sounds of your notes, I was dead in the water. But asking me to do that would play the other 7 sounds. Bingo, I could hear the 8th sound. So you could say I was kind of different maybe from some of you if you don't have that kind of natural music ability. If you place me against Mozart, I'm not special. I'm different, but well, compared to Mozart, I'm not that different. So Jesus came because he was different. And while he was here, he was different. But he's no special than us. This is my last slide. My boss over in my right-hand corner, my generous publisher, has looked at her watch, and I'm looking at mine, and I'm a little behind. Seminal question, why was Jesus crucified? Jesus was crucified because of his behavior. He did the wrong stuff for a Jewish peasant under Roman rule. He talked to the wrong people. He said the wrong things. What he said was a message that was beginning to become popular with the poor, the disenfranchised, and the authorities were threatened by that and didn't like it. Jesus was given a chance to recant, and he didn't. He chose not to. So by his own decision, because he talked about this new kingdom he was going to bring into the world. His followers were beginning to call him King of the Jews. If you were under Roman rule, there was one king, Caesar, the emperor. There could be no other kings of any kind for anyone. So you would be given a chance to recant and say, I don't know what happened to me. Must have been a bad martini last night. Yeah, I'm not the king. The emperor is the only one. Thank you very much. And Jesus chose not to do that. According to Roman law, there was only one punishment. And that was crucifixion. That was their favorite method of execution. Now, obvious by their absence should be certain religious claims that Jesus died to save you from your sins. You're God. You have an irreparable, inseparable connection to the source. Jesus came here just like the rest of us for his own reasons and his own purposes. There's no heaven and hell. Jesus went on to say that in spiritual dimensions, there's no good or bad, better or worse, higher rank, lower rank. There are no progressions to get from, well, you're at this level, and eventually you want to get to the 44th, 155th level, so you can go on and do something that's even grander. At least according to the Jesus that talked to me, we can hash that out. None of that exists. So basically, Jesus contradicted every tenet of Christianity. So I need to stop because I've allowed us about 8 minutes for questions. And I was going to channel, but to be honest with you, in 8 minutes, I don't think that's going to be possible. I hope none of you came just for that reason. And if you did, see me at the signing table and we'll get together and I'll channel for 1 or 2 or 10. So do you have any questions quickly?
You know, one thing I want you to notice, how all of the information is coming, the same information is coming through in different forms from all the speakers. To me, that always shows it has validity and it's real. I get hundreds and hundreds of manuscripts submitted. People are getting the same information through different ways. So it's time for it to come out and everybody know about it. Not be hidden by the church's dogma anymore. Okay, let's go to questions.
Excuse me.
And I can't see you because of the light, so.
My question was just if we could all stay a little longer to enjoy the channeling. Would that be possible?
Sure. Dolores, is that acceptable to you?
As long as it won't go into the next speaker. Yeah, they start at 11, so we got to make sure everything stays on track. Okay, yeah, just so we don't go too long.
Okay, it's not magic. I don't levitate. I need a few minutes to go off somewhere. I won't remember what happened. So, and, you know, like I said, there's a chance Jesus may not show, but something tells me maybe he will. After all, this is his gig, not mine.
All right, Henry, just tell Jesus to watch the clock.
Dolores, would you like to be Jesus today? So, you don't have to give me your name. I'm not interested in that. All you have to do is ask a question. I'll go away. When Jesus appears in my mind and is ready to go, he will say the word using my mouth and brain. Boy, that's a challenge. He'll say the word proceed. That's usually how he does it. And then you're on your own. So shall we give this a try? And if somebody says time's up, then I'll come back. I don't think so. proceed.
When you were talking about the analogy between the drop of water and going to the source, my question is, when we finally do decide to go to the source and we become part of that source, do we lose our individuality completely, or is there still some of my identity that goes into that source that's just special, that's just me, that one drop of water?
The short answer is, or would appear to be, that you lose your identity. However, it presents itself as what you would call a conundrum. For in fact, you do not lose your identity, because your identity, in reality, is the identity to which you are moving. You are in a physical plane, understandably challenged by that which separates you from pure spirit existence. Nevertheless, you came from the source, were once actually the drop of water in the beaker, and when you left the source, you did not lose your source identity. You retained it. So when you return to the source, you are returning, in a sense, to yourself. Does that help any?
Many people profess to be your followers at this point in time, many churches and so forth. What message would you say to the people who profess to be your followers and who are obviously misconstruing what you came originally, the message that you came originally to give? What would you say to them? What message would you have for them at this point?
Excellent question. Unfortunately, in the time frame we had today, there was not opportunity to address that subject. It is addressed in the document you call book. However, we are all on a journey, experiencing, creating, learning, refusing to learn and experiencing that. And part of that, from a human perspective, means we may be Buddhist and we may be Hindus and we may be Muslims and we may be Christians of a wide variety of stripes. And we may believe this and we may believe that, and in fact, it's really not that important. What is important is the journey. What is more important is seeking. And hopefully you sensing and answering that what some humans describe as a still small voice within you that leads you first to this and to that and to the other. So your brothers and sisters involved in some form of mainline Christianity believing and embracing what they are taught and what they hear, are just like you, seeking, hoping, hopefully learning, exposing themselves to different information, insight, wisdom. And it is for them to traverse their path and for you to traverse yours. And perhaps from a human perspective, they seem to be going in opposite directions. But the more important aspect is that they are going. They are striving. They are struggling with human existence, as do you. They are embracing what seems appropriate for them now, what brings hope to them now, what makes sense to them now, and perhaps in the future, as humans count it, it will be different or the same. But it is their path and their journey, and it is important that they be on it. Have we spoken in riddles?
Hello. We have been talking about the things you have done to help humankind, but it has come to my attention that maybe you also had in helping the earth heal from the great devastation. If you can help with that.
May I ask for clarification? You're asking if I can help with some devastation. Is that accurate?
An event that I called that has come to my attention that it happened millions of years ago, and it's known to me as the Great Devastation. And it came to my attention that you might have had a dealing with helping the earth recover from that event.
The shortest response that we have, hopefully wanting for you, is that we have knowledge of this devastation. Perhaps we simply do not know of it. Being, as you call it, on the other side does not necessarily mean we know all things. Perhaps it is known by some other name. Perhaps you must go back to this one who shared this information with you and ask for more information. But unfortunately for this audience, we cannot comment.
Jesus, I was wondering if you would share with us your involvement in Judith Schuckman and the Course in Miracles.
We may need to explore your word involvement a bit. There were a variety of entities involved in that process. And our own involvement was somewhat, as you would categorize things in the physical plane, less than others. It might be best described in your terms as a committee effort, where a variety of entities were collecting information and suggesting information and sharing it with those humans involved in the process. That feels to us like you are not receiving much on your return of a question investment. How do you feel? Would you prefer more info?
I feel amazed.
Good morning. My question is, did the physical person, Jesus of Nazareth, truly die on the cross? Or did he survive, travel the world, and give humankind more teachings? And if it's the second case, will we be finding more evidence of this and the added teachings?
What a question. Earlier, we were asked about those who follow traditional Christianity. And we spoke to their path and your path and someone else's path, and the importance of being on the path. And your question somewhat falls into that category. Because we are aware that there are various perspectives, various answers to your question. Ours is that we died on the cross, the body was buried, the body did not rise from the dead, the body did not ascend into heaven, the body turned to dust. And the real essence of who I am moved on. Regarding documentation, there is none in existence that would support a belief that we survived and lived a long human existence somewhere else. But if this belief is something that is important to you, that is something that attracts your attention, do not let the absence of documentation be a deterrent. For the Christians on their side believe something else. And most of their documents did not exist for hundreds of years after my death. And remember that if I spoke to a peasant female at a well, there was no one there to record it. There was no one there who could have recorded it in print if they wanted to record it in print, because they were illiterate. And parchment doth not make an author a favorable traveling companion, nor does quill. So, for many, quote, truths, there is truly a paucity of documentation, and a massive amount of documentation that was created by those who found some advantage in its creation. Permit me to babble on a bit more about that, for it is a subject of some fondness, but I will not take much more of your time.
I'm sorry, but we're going to have to stop it. Tell Jesus not to be offended. Okay. Okay. Because we live in a world that has time, and we have to stick to that. Is that okay, Henry? Okay,
Yes.
then you want to come back? Let's thank Jesus for giving us the information.